Chapter 157, Officer Jun. A society was made of people, and must therefore be handled by them. Although there would be plenty of inefficiencies, and perhaps there would also be errors, at least compared to relying completely on the system, Althea didn't mind. Only when there was room for growth would people actually do so. She would never allow her people to become stagnant and be left behind by the times. Back to the justice system, she mused that there would definitely be more grey area conflicts in the future than any other. She wanted the territory to have an objective system, which the universe system assisted with, but at the same time she didn't want this organism to be a callous robot. The delicate balance must still be reached somehow, and this was how Mathilda's team would come into play. Silently, her eyes zoned in on one particular name, one of the officers she had just invited. Jun Suarez. "Go clean that up," a beautiful dark-skinned woman pointed at a corner, then gave her husband a pointed look. Jun looked at the kitchen area of the house, and carrying the broom made of dried plants, nodded. Okay. After cleaning out the small amount of dusts, not much, the house was just a few days old. After all, they took out the old clothes as a wet mop. These clothes were some of the many clothes that got destroyed as they traveled in this world. His daughter Mimi had already moistened hers and was wiping the wooden sofa, newly installed, while the two of them, husband and wife, focused on the larger surfaces. Anyway, today was their first day in their new home. They had finally moved on from the dormitory, and it felt so incredibly happy. They rented one floor of a duplex unit for a month, with an ambitious goal of paying for the down payment of its ownership within the next few months. They had calculated, as long as the two adults worked hard, owning property was not a pipe dream. Of course, they had to be permanent residents first, but the contributions required were actually fair, only 5,000, valuing half if paid for in currency, and achievable as long as one worked for the territory long enough. This in itself was amazing. After all, in Terran, after decades of working, they had yet to pay off their loans and mortgages. But here, although it would take a while, the possibility of it was there, more concrete, and it wouldn't take them decades to accomplish either. The couple had just arrived a few days ago, and they already felt unprecedented peace. Of course, it would be better if they had a stable source of income. For now, they had been gathering wood and stone to sell, but after seeing the improving lives of the existing residents, they couldn't help but feel a bit of ambition. They too want to live, not just survive. So they took a risk and spent nearly all of their money for rent, leaving just enough for basic necessities, believing everything would be okay. As he joined his wife in arranging their new home, he couldn't help but recall his life a few weeks ago. The day started out like any other. He, an overworked public official, went out of the house early in the morning, eating the breakfast his wife prepared for him before dawn, and then went to work, expecting he would get back home all tired after dusk. He usually had to work overtime, and that day should not have been an exception, but for some reason, he had a foreboding feeling that made him go home earlier. At the time, when he saw his wife was safely cooking at home, and his daughter was doing homework on the dining table beside her, the sense of relief that came over him was surprising. For an hour or two of peace after that, he had thought that he was just overworked and was thinking too much. Except a disaster really happened, and he couldn't be more thankful he had gone home. Had he maintained his habit of going home late? Jonah paused, sensing him just staring at her and no longer working. She laughed and pinched his cheek. "Are you not used to working now?" she said. "You don't have to help me." Jun blushed a bit, and it made him both touched and guilty, because he knew he had indeed been neglecting his family the past few weeks before all hell went loose. Looking at his wife, who was now smiling as she had been, Jun heaved out a relieved sigh. Although the disaster was horrifying and sad, at least the family was together, right? In any case, the family happily arranged their new abode, moving the furniture as needed. Looking at their simple but complete home, he couldn't help but admire the territory again. They really didn't have much silver anymore, and yet they could have a house like this. Even if it was just for a month, it was really amazing. Calculating their current resources, they still had money for food for the next few days. He was not worried. Here, as long as every member of the family worked hard, they definitely wouldn't go hungry. They didn't even attempt to be heroic and try strengthening themselves outside. With their strength, if they didn't have guards with them as those employees' training had, they'd just be jumping to their deaths. The fact that so many people still died under these monsters' jaws after so long was testament to how strong the monsters were. His refugee story wasn't unique. Anyone who had been entering the past few days had similar tragedies. They had a daughter. Such a risk wasn't an option, not when there were safer alternatives. Anyway, they now had hope for a good life, and they ought to celebrate their first meal in their new home. "Shall we go shopping for ingredients?" his wife asked. "We don't have food for lunch and dinner anymore." "Yes," he smiled, happy to accompany his wife, holding hands throughout. Their daughter, on the other hand, happily followed them with her pigtails bouncing as she skipped about. She declared today was her day off from working, gathering resources, and it was time for her to take care of the elderly. This amused the couple greatly. The family happily shopped along the stalls, their baskets filling up with their needs for the next few days. While their savings were gone, they just thought to live for the moment. They had gone through so much after the disaster, they ought to reward themselves. However, just as they reached one of their final stalls, they heard a little noise not far from them. Chapter 158, A Small Scuffle. When they arrived, they saw two middle-aged men, one Caucasian and one copper-skinned, glaring at each other with red eyes. "Why are you so rude? Why are you so rude?" "I didn't do anything," the dark-skinned man said, frowned, and looked around. "I was just buying things from this stall," and he suddenly scoffed at me and mumbled rude things. "You were laughing first. I worked hard for this," the Caucasian said, raising his voice, and the dark-skinned man looked at him indignantly. "What? I didn't laugh." "You saw my items and you laughed at it," the stall owner, the blonde man in his late 40s, yelled. "I didn't force you to buy it." The dark-skinned man frowned, but his fist clenched, thinking there was no explaining to this guy. The fact that he was on the receiving end of nagging with saliva splatter was making him red in annoyance. Maybe he should just punch him in the face. However, he had just clenched his fist and was about to raise his arm when a new person suddenly appeared between them. He was a bit tall with tanned skin. He had an average face, but his stature was authoritative. "Excuse me," Jun said with a neutral smile. "I know it's not my place to intervene, but from what I've been hearing there seems to be a misunderstanding." "Who are you?" they spat, glaring at him simultaneously. Any other would have been intimidated, but Jun remained unfazed. "My name is Jun. I'm new here. I also worked in the legislative sector back in Terran," he said. "I may be able to give an outsider's perspective." His brown eyes landed on the clenched fist. "There's no need to go physical with this argument. Please remember that fighting isn't allowed in the territory. We don't want to be blacklisted, right?" This made the two men pause, shoulders slumping a little. "May I know what happened?" he said, standing straight, looking even taller. Although he was prying, his stance was firm and poised, and unconsciously the two men saw him as an authoritative figure. "He laughed at my craft." "I didn't, I swear. I even admired it a bit. It's just that I remembered some things." Jun smiled. It seemed that there really was a misunderstanding. The angry man flushed a bit, not just of embarrassment, but also of some memories. "I'm sorry, it's just that my daughter," the blonde man paused. "It's my daughter's technique. My daughter taught me this." The other man's stance softened and just patted the other man's shoulder. "I also have a daughter, but I don't know where she is now," he said. The memory I remembered. My reaction wasn't a sneer. I remembered my daughter was also fond of this. It was a generational thing, I suppose. The other man couldn't help but smile a little, the things they get obsessed by at that age. And the two actually started talking about the habits of their daughter's generation. There was even a bit of laughter at the end. And the conflict was over, just like that. As the couple walked home, he noticed his wife had been silent the whole time, but also giving him furtive glances here and there. Jun raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "I'm thinking maybe we could recommend a legal team," his wife asked him. The guard had said the system was open for suggestions. It may even award contribution points if it was worth it. Jun was taken aback but was also very interested. That might work. Joanna smiled and proudly lifted her head. "I'm looking for a job with Gia Restaurant. Mr. Harold said I was a good cook and have a lot of potential. I'm already on the final interview." Jun was surprised. He didn't know this. "Wow, congratulations," he said, grabbing his wife's hand with pride. Me too," his 10-year-old daughter raised her hand. "I made 20 whole copper coins yesterday." She said the little girl could fit anywhere and could get a lot of resources within the territory to sell. The couple looked at each other and laughed. The family went home, and his wife began preparing dinner while he drafted his proposal in the room. He concentrated and did his best to think of all the issues and concerns that could occur, and he only realized the time when his wife had called him for lunch. He spent a few more hours after the meal before he finally finished. He finished just before dinner was done. "Let's talk about it after dinner," Jonah said, patting his shoulders, expressing good luck. He smiled and embraced his wife, feeling extremely lucky to have her in his life. Gathering courage, he headed to the village center to submit his advice to the territory to open a legal team. But before he even left for the village center, a ding rang inside his head. Alter a village system determined you are eligible for the job of officer for internal affairs. Job description: 1. Organize the settlement of newcomers. 2. Recommend jobs and job placements. 3. Research citizen needs and solutions. 4. Assist the elder of diplomacy with internal relations. 5. Make detailed daily reports of accomplishments and send to the village center. Wage 300 copper day, free residency. 50 contribution day. Do you accept? Yes, no. What is it? Jonah asked, puzzled, looking at her husband who was staring blankly at the wall. Well, I got an offer, a job offer from the territory. What? Jonah exclaimed, pleasantly surprised. He was as well, but he dared not accept it thoughtlessly. As a former lawyer, he was not the type to bite off pies from the skis as soon as they fell. So he went to the village center and made inquiries. I have received a job as an officer. What will happen if I don't do well? Will I be punished? What would happen if one day I hope to quit my job? Will I be kicked out? Althea received the message. Officer questions and reports were set to be sent directly to her, and she was quite amused. When people asked the stone tablet so earnestly, somehow she got the feeling that her citizens were praying to her to get some answers. She shook her head in amusement before sending out the answer. Quitting a job is done in the territory center. However, a period of 15 days of turnover is required. If the territory assess that you are no longer fit for the job, you will simply lose the qualifications. Of course, this will enter your record, and receiving territory jobs would be more difficult thereafter. Jun read the replies over and over and was relieved. With a deep breath, he finally pressed yes and ran back home to tell the family the good news. Tourist City, 18 months ago. Wow, she really did it. Auntie is amazing, Althea exclaimed as her emerald eyes watched the news aptly. She had been worried for a whole day. Fortunately, the news coverage was real-time, so they didn't have to suffer too much. Eden Country has officially received majority development rights of the Yukon Valley. Forming a partnership with Utah Country, they will begin sustainable extraction within the year. The Yukon Valley is one of the few valleys with a biodiversity index of moderate, now very rare in our contemporary world. Eden Country will now be safeguarding this place, and our scientists will be at the forefront of sustainable research in the area. It could be said that the mission to Utah Country was a resounding success. Not just her, Gil as well. Her husband's low velvety voice sounded beside her as his warm hand wrapped around her clothed stomach. She turned to look at him curiously, soft hand on his chest. You can tell me now, right? After seeing him not worried at all about the deal, she had a feeling this guy knew a lot. It was probably top secret before, but maybe she could hear about it now. Oh, how curious. Garen looked dotingly at his wife who had sparkling eyes. His naughty hand caressed her curvaceous waist. Since she was no longer worried, perhaps they could finally be lovey-dovey again. It depends, he said teasingly. I've been suffering for a whole day, you know. Without further ado, she abruptly sat on him and wrapped her arms around him, meeting his lips. His eyes widened a little and he sat still as she parted from him and placed many pecks on his face, his nose and his lips, over and over. Husband, Tilda, please tell me, she asked coquettishly, resuming her pecks. This adorableness, combined with the feeling of her softness, made him snap like a mouse trap. Althea only got the answer to her questions several hours later. Apparently the deal wasn't meant to be so one-sided. However, about a year ago, an insurgent group rose up and caused chaos around the whole Utah Country. the military couldn't defeat these scum. A special ops team, led by Gil, went to Utah country to fix this internal conflict. It wasn't that the mission wasn't dangerous, but they managed to get information about the group, about the insurgent group's internal workings. And this was, amusingly, all due to the online activity of the leader's son. What makes it more interesting is that the leader of the insurgents was an illegitimate child of their monarch. Althea chuckled a bit. Not only was the younger generation the accidental source of a detrimental leak, but the insurgent leader himself believed the throne should have been his by virtue of his being the eldest, illegitimate son. Althea rested her head on her husband's wide shoulder, a little amused. What a drama. Tusk, that's why you should always hire on merit, she mumbled, otherwise who knew what they'd do accidentally. Garin nodded, just staring at his beautiful wife lounging on him. However, it definitely wouldn't have gone so smoothly without Auntie Mathilda in the front line. He said, after all, it could have just gone the other way. We may have been able to receive backlash for prying into other people's property and business. Yes, I can't imagine anyone but Auntie actually pulling it off. Indeed, he said, and Althea didn't notice his eyes darkening until she was already flipped over. Now I have told you everything, he said, it's time for my reward. Her eyes widened, gently pushing his face away from hers, trying to escape his massive body hovering over her. But you already. But her meek questioning was shut by his lips on hers. She succumbed in the end, of course, she did. Anyway, she really ought to reward him well indeed. Altera present. Now that the basic structures of the offices have been planned, Althea decided to organize the hiring process of their staff. After all, they alone would have a bit of a challenge with the current population, let alone when their number surged. However, a lot of these fields were not her specialty. Even with her helpful and omniscient tablet, she didn't dare hire based on her own knowledge. She hoped the positions would be based on merit eventually, like having exams and the like. In the end, she decided to include an initial screening process with the help of the system. A basic exam with an ideally massive pool of questions they would be answering. Basics like the person's character and proper expertise would also be determined at this point. She sent the notification to all officers and elders to create their own questions and answers. When there were more supervisors hired, she'd ask them as well. She wasn't afraid of leaks, because each employee who accepted the recruitment was to sign a virtual contract. Some of the main pillars of this were integrity, loyalty to the territory, and the avoidance of purposely doing anything that could put the territory at any sort or degree of disadvantage. After this initial screening, the applicants would then go to a face-to-face interview with their respective future bosses. Their sincerity, resourcefulness, and skill would be the primary characteristics to be determined here. Eventually, she would have a full office of government officials who would be sincere to the territory. Speaking of office, she also had to tell Oslo to build a building near the village centre, but not too close to hinder its potential expansion. It was a 4-story building, which was the maximum they could build until legitimate concrete was available. Each office would at least have half a floor to themselves. As for the interior, it would be modelled after the typical offices, but with more interior decoration, interior plants, and just an overall less plain and boring design. She smiled. Now that a lot of the experts were in place, she could finally rest her mind on some distracting territory problems. She could finally start doing what she really liked, researching. After all, she was the elder of plant research now, was she not? She ought to start doing her job. She couldn't upgrade with the mobs outside anyway. Tusk might as well do what she did best. Althea was very excited to go to her lab, children dutifully deposited in the neighbor auntie's house, to finally develop the products she had in her head. However, before she even settled in her lab, Sheila burst in, with wide red eyes looking quite panicked. Boss. Althea was a bit startled. What is it? Please help us, someone has been poisoned, we are not sure how to handle it, she mumbled, looking very worried. Without another word, Althea gently placed down her experimental tools and followed the other woman to the clinic. After rushing, the 2 women got to their destination within a couple of minutes, with Sheila bringing her into one of the ward beds. When they arrived, they saw Betty was already there, and she was using her healer ability to keep the patient's vitality. Walking closer, Althea realized it was a child. It was only a little boy, probably 5 or 6 years old, with chestnut hair and freckled skin. It was just that this unique skin was now covered with bluish spots, as if he had bruises all over his body. "Oh my, what did you eat?" she mumbled, but quickly saw the symptoms, realizing it was the same poison she fell victim to. In fact, Sheila had also found it a little familiar, but she didn't remember the formula, so she had to call Althea. Not to mention, she wasn't entirely sure it was the same poison either, as the symptoms were much more pronounced than Althea's. Some foragers gathering resources outside the territory found him in the forests. Because all intrinsically poisonous plants were displaced, there were really a lot of poisonous plants just outside the territory. However, Althea had made a point for Sheila and Lily to teach people about these poisonous plants, at least to some degree, which significantly lowered the damage the plants brought to her citizens. The child must be a newcomer. Anyway, the boy was found very, very late, so Betty's ability could only maintain so much vitality in the poor child. "I couldn't keep it for long," Betty said with furrowed eyebrows, her pretty blonde hair wet with sweat. Betty was a healer, but she couldn't handle serious poisons, not when it already reached the bones. Althea immediately took out Tori and handled the solution, using the same materials as she had before, but with differing concentration. Before administering, she made sure to check for its approximate effects twice, in consideration of the boy's light weight and degree of poisoning. Althea eventually judged the solution to be as safe and effective as it could be, considering the time. They immediately got the little boy to drink it. However, it was not easy as the boy was unconscious and looked in so much pain. He didn't cry out though, his little eyebrows were just furrowed, and he was shaking in evident pain. It broke the hearts of those who saw it, especially Sheila, who had a brother not much older than this one, and Althea, who had a young son. Soon, the medicine started working a bit, and he could utter words in his dazed state. "Sister, sister," the boy mumbled, voice stuttering and longing. Sheila couldn't help but hold the boy's hand, acting like the sister he was looking for, and the boy immediately called, grabbing her hand for dear life. After a while, the boy's bluish complexion turned pinkish, and he began to recover some of the complexion a little boy should have. Seeing this, the women finally breathed out a sigh of relief. "Who's he?" Althea asked, looking around, belatedly realizing there was no one around who resembled a guardian. "He came with the latest batch of refugees," Sheila said, wiping her sweat. "Doesn't he have an adult?" No one knows him," Sheila said, and Betty couldn't help but add, "I believe he was staying in the orphanage, the first orphan, so to speak." Speaking of, the concept of an orphanage was a rare thing to Betty. She only ever saw something somewhat similar in a few cities, but it was here in a small village and still with an arguably better setup. In a few cities, there was an establishment just called shelter for these children, and basically it was a place where parentless children were thrown, giving them just enough food to survive until they were 12, the age people tended to start fighting monsters. Here, the orphanage would take care of the child's entire well-being, and all the way until the age of 18. Then again, Ultra Village seemed to be forward in so many things. Althea looked at the boy as she heard that the boy had no adult with him, feeling heavy. With this, she knew that the child was probably alone for the past weeks. How terrible! The unfortunate fact was that defenseless children were likely to lose their lives first in the two tragedies that they simultaneously had to go through. Surviving children, like Maya, tended to have their protectors with them. So far, there were only a handful of children in the territory, and only this one was without a guardian. "It's amazing he got this far on his own," she whispered, and the others nodded in agreement. Sheila looked warmly at the boy, gently patting his head and wiping his forehead. "He's a very good kid," she said, heart suddenly longing for her own family. She wondered where they were. Meanwhile, the little boy with the given name of Horus was having a horrible dream. He dreamed of life back in Terran, when he and his sister struggled through the slums, barely managing to eat. His sister worked very hard, but even in his young age, he knew his sister's work wasn't good, because many people frowned at her, pointing with mean faces whenever she was there. They also called her names, which he didn't understand, but a child like him could still feel whether it was malicious or not. He tried to help her many times. He tried looking for a job, but what could his small body do? Eventually, he discovered that he had a talent. It was the talent to take people's things without them knowing. And he was amazing at it. With this skill, he bought his sister food and new clothes, and told her people gave it to them. Although she was questioning, she took it, playfully pinching his cheek, thinking that her brother was so cute, so people naturally wanted to help him. This went on for weeks on end, and his final victim seemed like any other, but only much richer. It was a big man in a suit with a bulging wallet as bloated as his stomach. He had an ugly beard on his face and cigars on his hand, his other hand holding the waist of the lady next to him. He was very distracted, laughing loudly with his friends and teasing the ladies in his arms. He was so distracted and not minding his wallet hanging out of his pocket at all. It was as if he was asking him to take it. Horace's confident mind was already thinking of how to buy that pretty hair tie for his sister. He thought that, like every other time, he would be able to get away with it. Until, of course, he got caught. Chapter 161, Little Horace. Well, what do we have here? Such a small little thief. The man grinned evilly, grabbing his small arms. The men threw him down with a bang, hitting the table leg. The man raised his feet to give him a kick. It wasn't too heavy that he'd break bones or die, but every kick hurt very much, and it probably wouldn't have felt much different from it. The man's cohorts chuckled, while the people around could only close their eyes and frown, with no one stepping over to help. Luckily, there was still someone who was willing to take a small step. Someone around knew of him. And the person immediately called his sister, who was working her second job nearby. "What are you doing?" she yelled as soon as she arrived, to see a man kicking his brother for the nth time. "Please stop," she screamed, running and covering her brother's body. "He tried stealing from me," the man said, but paused when he saw the girl more closely. "What? And he's pretty good at it. He must have been doing it for a while, yeah." Horace could still remember the despair in his sister's eyes when she realized what he had been doing. She sobbed but covered him with her body regardless. "That's enough," she remained firm. "He didn't get to steal anything, did he?" The man didn't answer and just leered at his sister. Horace didn't like his stare, and he tried to sit up to protect her, but he was too small and weak and powerless. He didn't really know what happened after that. All he knew was that they were taken to a cheap motel room, and he was asked to wait outside. He didn't know what his sister did inside the room, but the man didn't beat him anymore after. He even threw them some money. He was confused, but he hated the feeling of helplessness very much. He grabbed the money and threw it back to him. The piece of crumpled money hit the man's leg, and a moment later he fell down. For a moment he thought his throw was super strong, and he grinned. But then the man's body started to twist in odd shapes, then he began growling, and then crawling to his direction like a monster. His sister got out of the room and screamed, grabbing a random thing, a vase, and hitting him with it. The vase broke, but the monster continued to move, unbothered. He felt himself being pulled back, behind her sister, as she took a piece of the vase and stabbed the man. It continued to move, and his sister stabbed it over and over, until it finally stopped moving. He saw his sister shaking and crying and held his hand. "We need to run," she said, shaking, but as they opened the door, they only saw more monsters. They were everywhere. But they closed the door and saw the monster of the man was still twitching. His sister frowned and kicked the piece of vase stuck in its head, and it finally, truly, it stopped moving. "Is it really dead now?" he asked, but when no one answered, he lifted his head to see his sister staring into thin air. His sister paused. "System," she voiced out, confused. "Sister." She looked at him with her red eyes still tearing up, but after a while she told him to hold a weapon. He didn't really understand, and he watched his sister take another piece of the vase, a bigger piece, and made him hold it. "Sister." With another piece in hand, his sister opened the door again. Horace was very confused and extremely terrified. "Sister." But he watched as she led one zombie in, closing the door again, and stabbing it over and over until it could hardly move. "Kill it," his sister said, holding his hand and motions for it to hit the skull. Horace shook, feeling the hard skull against the vase. "But..." His sister sighed and held his cheek. "Don't you trust your sister?" He shook his head. Of course, he trusted his sister. So with some guidance and a lot of snot and tears, little Horace managed to finally stab through the piece of porcelain into the zombie's brain. "Welcome, Terran Survivor 45, to the Universe Assistance System." "Do you say it?" It's a screen, he said, extending his hand, and saw his hand go through the screen. It was very pretty, like gazillions of super tiny luminescent powder forming an image in front of him. It's really there, okay, his sister said, stuttering, before she dragged him back to the inner room and they locked the door. They stayed there for hours, embracing each other in their shaken states. Fortunately, there was food in the small refrigerator of the hotel room, so they did not go hungry. Hiding inside his sister's arms, he looked up at her. What's going on, sister? I don't know either, she said, voice still stuttering. It seems we're going to get taken to a new world. No monsters. No monsters, she said, but he felt she wasn't very certain. They stayed like that for a few more hours, resting a bit, waiting for the counter to stop. But a few hours in, and amongst the creepy scratching of the doors, he could see the changes in his sister. This won't do, she said. We can't waste time here. Sister. We need to fill up our space, she said. We ought to live better there, right? He looked at his sister, nodding, and they opened the door with weapons in hand. They went out to take valuables within the motel, and they fought off the zombies together one by one, using whatever they had on hand. Fortunately, the motel was locked, and the number of zombies outside their rooms was limited, giving them some time to adjust. His sister took the emergency axe, and he was given the longest knife in the kitchen. They took away the people's wallets and went straight to the back room and took in as much food and supplies there as they could, especially food with long shelf lives like grains and uncooked pasta. There was also some jewelry and little gold from the customers, though not much, as no one in the motel was very rich. The most expensive they got was a wedding ring on a man's hand, and the man's alone, as the woman didn't have any rings on her. It was not easy, but just as they finally got used to it and managed to scour much of the small motel, a circle of light lit up under them, bringing them to another strange and even more dangerous world. When they transferred with hundreds of others. The true nightmare began at that time, because monsters far stronger than what they encountered surrounded them. There were so many, tens and tens of them, and their ugly appearance made a lot freeze in fear, becoming easy targets to eat. The way the people were mauled was a thing of nightmares, striking terror in more people's hearts, and in turn making them easy victims. It was a horrible cycle. Soon the fight began, and some people managed to snap out of the shock and defend themselves. Even if the monsters were strong, they were far more in number. That was what some of them thought at first, but they quickly realized that the monsters were nothing like the zombies back in Terran. They were much, much stronger, and even a group of big men couldn't beat a monster without someone losing an arm, a leg, and his life. He and his sister struggled to kill one together, along with a few others, eventually learning to help out and defend themselves. His little body did its best to help, and when he managed to slash a wound on its feet, he brightened and celebrated, not realizing that it only made the monster go berserk, and it lifted its sharp claws to his direction. Horus! Slash! Sister, he yelled, watching the monster's claw slice his sister's face. Raw! He yelled back, R-O-A-R-R, he screamed with his little voice, running to it. He used their last weapon to hit it, but it didn't hurt much. Instead, it lifted its paws to smash him. But Horus' unknown skill, triggered by extreme anger and adrenaline, helped him avoid its attack, over and over. To the point that it was even superior to the adults. Evasion E, avoid detection of all monsters level 10 and below for 10 seconds. Consumption, 5 mana. It wasn't clear what it meant, but he instinctively knew it was helpful. He willed the ability to apply, and it did, and he ran to the monster. He immediately jumped to the weakened monster, stabbing its eyes repeatedly. It shook wildly as if he was a fly that would let go with a shake, but energy coursed through his small body, and he gripped the monster with his small arms, stabbing again and again every time he could. Finally, he dug enough of its eye to finally reach its brain. Stab, stab, stab. He stabbed until it fell down and no longer moved. Killed Stormdoer LV1, plus 30 experience, plus 30 copper. He didn't even notice this as he sprinted to his bleeding sister, sobbing with snot, yelling for help. But who could pay attention to him when there were still a dozen monsters slashing about? He could only drag his sister to a safe place, trying to stop the bleeding on her face with a clean cloth they got from the motel. Sniff, I'm sorry, sniff. His sister weakly took out a handkerchief and wiped it on his tanned face. I won't die, she said, don't cry, you're a big boy now, aren't you? The group of them, after losing a good portion, did end the small mob, but his sister earned a scar. More than once, she was told she was ugly many times, and little Horace would attack them every time. By the second day, there were only about 50 of them left alive, most of whom were very injured, and no one bothered with this little thing anymore. Their group of hundreds struggled through the first few days, dwindling quickly in numbers and becoming more and more miserable as they traveled. Soon they encountered an enclosure, a fence, and they ran with their remaining energy to look for a gate. Welcome to Vismont Village. He and his sister looked at each other with bright eyes. Happily, his sister wrapped her arms around him. We're finally safe. How could they know it was the beginning of another, more tragic, experience? In the village, they found out that the paper money they took was useless. Fortunately, there was some jewelry and a little gold they got from the motel, but it was very little. Together, they had scraped up only a few silver currency they could use. This wasn't enough for them to live with a decent stomach for a week. They worked hard to gather what they needed to survive. They were doing honest work, and he wasn't stealing anymore, as his sister had asked him. Except for the fights because someone would insult his sister, the two of them had gotten used to one legitimate meal every 2 days, and living in a shed made with leaves. They had also gotten used to the horrid and sticky smell of feces and body odor. But then that man came. He said he had fallen in love with his sister, her strength and hard work. He also needed a good wife and wondered if they could consider living with him. His sister was naturally reluctant, but that man was charming and eloquent. He also promised she could leave if they couldn't make it work. He was charming and capable and promised them a good life in their territory. At first, he did. He let them live with him in a residential unit and let them eat at the restaurant every day. But a few days later, after he went back home from gathering wood, he found his beautiful sister bloodied, naked, and without a breath. There in that damned place, he brutally lost his sister. What was his punishment? He was just banished from the territory. The man was strong, a cockroach, he wouldn't die. How could he be reconciled? So he escaped from the village, and he ran after his sister's murderer. He ventured to the wild by himself. A 6-year-old who could barely handle a level 1, using his ability to the most of his ability, went on a mission to hunt. But he lost his target in the end. He followed his sister's murderer to this direction, but didn't find him yet. He swore to kill him and stab him dozens of times more than what he did to his sister. So he looked and looked, traveled, barely avoiding countless near-death hits. Other than his new magic skill, he used his flexibility to climb up trees and jump between them. For days, he managed to escape monsters time and time again, trying to find the most hideous monster there was. Althea village, present. Horace woke up with red eyes and saw the most beautiful older sister he had ever seen, but his dark heart could not appreciate it, as the hate in his heart was revived by his dreams. What are you thinking? Althea asked, noticing the little boy's dark mood. Stabbing someone 25 times. Her eyebrows rose. A potential little villain, eh? But Althea's face didn't change. Instead, she sat on the side of his bed, patiently. It must be a villain then, she said, nodding at him. The child froze and looked at her with wide eyes. He said, voice cracking, he killed my sister. Do you know where he is? The child shook his head. If you did, how would you beat him? The boy's lips pursed, not knowing what to answer. What are you doing outside the walls on your own? I wanted to be stronger, he said. He had seen so many people going out near the walls, using the sentries to assist their fights and getting stronger and stronger. He wanted that, but in the end, he fainted after touching a plant. He flushed red, embarrassed. Althea hid a smile and patted his little curly head. Why don't you stay with us and gather strength? The cute little boy with pale freckled skin, curly chestnut hair, and large round eyes looked at her, wondering if she was telling the truth. Then he remembered that man was no less kind. He was also charming, and suddenly the boy's body adopted a defensive stance. Althea blinked. Oh my, am I scary? she asked, touching her heart as if she was surprised and a little hurt. This made the boy flinch, and he shook his head immediately, then blushed again. This time, Althea and the other women couldn't help but laugh. "Don't worry," she said, "the territory is fair, you should know by now, right? You wouldn't suffer injustice here," she told him, patting his head, her melodious voice reaching his heart and calming it. "Not anymore. Welcome to Vismont Village, LV2. Please pay a visitor's fee of 10 copper within 5 minutes of entering. To become a temporary citizen, please pay 10 silver, valid for 1 month, and 15 gold for permanent residency." Ansel and the twins looked at each other as they entered. The twins looked a bit impressed. "Quite affordable, at least half of the previous one. I wonder how they tax." Ansel raised an eyebrow. "My previous one's about the same. They should have a default value or something they adjust." "What?" The twins looked at each other, indignant. "Our previous territory ripped us off then," Luke mumbled, gritting his teeth. After all, they were focused on looking for their mother during the 24 hours pre-migration. How much money could they take? Leo sighed, also remembering their poverty. Well, the Lord's dead now. He has no one to blame but himself, just a pity for the innocent. The trio was silent after that, going further inside the threshold to realize it was all forests. There wasn't even an actual pathway. Luke couldn't help but double-take and look back, confirming there really was a gate. Fortunately, there was still a rough trekking path that they could follow to wherever they ought to be heading. This territory should have just been upgraded, Ansel said as they walked forward, sharp eyes studying his surroundings. He remembered back in Bright, he saw additional walls getting erected far from where the old one was, and a few hours later, a beast tide arrived. While Luke continued to look around as he walked, Leo nodded. Then they should have just experienced a beast tide. Luke was startled. "Really? So sure?" Ansel told us before that his previous territory was upgraded right before the beast tide. You were too busy eating at the time. "Oh, didn't you see the trees felled outside the walls?" "Oh, I thought people were gathering resources or something." Luke shrugged and continued on his way. Ansel was amused. "It seems that all the brain went to you and the brawn went to him." Leo coughed and chuckled. "Well, in our current situation, he'd likely survive better." The trio continued walking, following the makeshift pathway they found. After a couple of minutes, they eventually saw a change of scenery. They encountered more and more people. They were setting camps in the forests. Some were using the tree canopies as roots, while some were completely cutting them off. However, considering the density of the forest, although many of the trees were cut, there was still a lot to cover the remaining scenery. It was just that, judging by the noise of chatter and the horrid smell that reached their brains, they could estimate that the people in this area would at least be in the several hundreds, if not thousands. Soon, the group arrived to see the crowd and saw the people and their living conditions. Most of them were living in makeshift sheds supported by the forests, covered with blood and very listless. It seemed that the beast tide really did a number on this place, Ansel thought, and he looked around the people to see who he could approach. Soon, they walked to a harmless-looking group, and Ansel took out a few bales of edible fruit. "Hello there, can you tell me more about this territory? What happened?" The people looked hungrily at the food in his hand, but they didn't take it immediately. "It's edible, I promise." And he sent out his signature playboy smile. The women on the team blushed immediately. The women were the first to be won over. How could such a handsome lad lower himself to give them poison? The territory just got attacked by a beast tide. Another girl took a few pieces. A lot of people died, even the wall almost fell. Who'd have thought? We were so happy when another wall, a taller one, appeared, but there were monsters everywhere, and many places were left unguarded. Then a middle-aged woman added, with a hint of wistfulness, "But we have a very good lord," she said. "During the time of crisis he was fighting with us." Everyone seemed to agree with this, admiration consistent in their expressions. He had held us together at that time. He asked everyone to gather resources to reinforce the walls, and now we survived. The loss was heavy. But some of us had been to other territories. This was nothing at all. The Lord said, if we lived well and protected the territory, the sacrifices of those people were not in vain. Ansel and the other two were a bit interested in this Lord, so admired by his people. Leo and Ansel in particular were intrigued. How many days had it been? Someone already bought so much of his people's hearts. They continued chatting with the women who happily accommodated them, and they, at some point, formed a little gossip circle. After a while, though, the little gossip circle would be bothered by the sound of a little commotion from the other side of the slums. "What's that?" Luke asked, chewing on some fruit. "It's them again," the person next to him, straight male, joined at some point, complained, frowning bitterly. "It's who?" "The Tiger Gang," he said. "They often come here to get protection fees." "Oh, your lord doesn't protect you." The man gave him a bad look, offended. "What do you know? It's just that everyone else is weak here." These guys were the main defense after most of the others died. It wasn't that the lord didn't want to kick them out, he had no choice. Ansel raised his hands in surrender, blinking in surprise. Yes, you're absolutely right." It was here that a menacing group of bulky men finally reached their area. They were giving intimidating stares at each person and waiting for them to give a copper. Leo looked at the dozens of gangsters with raised eyebrows. He tilted his body a little to Ansel, whispering, "So many of them survived. I heard it was a bunch of gangs put together after the migration." Ansel watched in interest, adopting the attitude of a detached bystander. However, it didn't stay that way as the gangsters eventually reached their circle. They looked menacing and slimy, a different type of disgusting altogether. The men paused at the sight of them, grinned, and began looking at the three of them up and down. Handsome young men. Ansel's eyes twitched, having the feeling that trouble was about to come. Couldn't he just look for his sister in peace? Aberdeen City, a year ago. Ansel looked at the beautiful ebony-haired woman in front of him, with his charming peach blossom eyes. He lifted the hand entangled with his own and placed it against his mouth, making the woman blush. Hannah, however, tried to push down her smile. After all, she was currently in the midst of questioning him. She couldn't help but remember the beautiful curvaceous blonde, and her mood dipped again. Who was that? Seeing that she couldn't get distracted, Ansel sighed, tightening his hold of her hand as he guided her towards a bench. Ansel was having a great date with this girlfriend of his when annoyingly encountered Winona, Althea's BFF, being harassed by someone in the same park. It was one of her rich suitors, the type that couldn't take no for an answer, and he was pretty much dragging her to go on a date with him. Although the two of them didn't get along well, bordering on hostility, actually, he couldn't let her be right. So he swooped in and dealt with the guy, no blood, just a couple of faux passes that made him lose balance and humiliate himself. However, it made his current girlfriend, a pretty exchange student from Utah country, to look at him questioningly. "She's my sister's best friend," he said, explaining patiently. "We're not close." "Not close?" Hannah asked, narrowing her eyes as if she could see if he was lying if he did so. He nodded very decisively. "Not close." Hannah didn't say anything for a while and just looked at him deeply, trying to determine if he wasn't just making excuses. Ansel leaned down and gave her a peck on the lips. "I wouldn't lie to anyone about this." He already had a reputation at this point, and the women knew what they were getting into. Hannah pursed her lips and sighed, succumbing, and they went on with their date. The couple continued their walk along the park, buying ice cream as they leisurely chatted, and it was really nice for a while. They stopped when they heard a cacophony of female screams nearby. "What's that?" Ansel asked, and they went closer to see what the commotion was about. Who knew, maybe it was a singer they liked, like Fable perhaps. Soon flyers and banners were seen on the ground and on banners, and they found out that it was actually a political campaign of a small politician. "Why does it seem like an idol is here?" Ansel asked, eyebrows furrowed. He turned to see his girlfriend staring at the life-size Sintra board model of the man. "That man is quite handsome," she said, and Ansel looked at Hannah in interest. "More handsome than your boyfriend." Hannah chuckled and tiptoed to kiss him on the cheek. "Of course. Vismont Village, present." The gangsters leered at them in a way that their stomach tumbled in disgust. "You're new here, aren't you?" one said, extending his hand. "Just right, let me tell you, to remain here you have to pay some cash." It was unsurprisingly Luke who stepped forward between his brother and greeted the man. "You haven't protected us yet, why should we pay you?" Luke immediately answered, with a deep frown on his face. One of the man's cohorts sneered and clenched his fist threateningly. "Pay or not?" Luke, their own goons, sneered back. Are you worth it?" Without warning, the man threw a punch, with Luke preparing to fight back. Ansel had gestured to stop them, not wanting Luke to get kicked out. But the punch actually connected, and Luke immediately countered back, pushing the other back a few steps. Ansel's eyebrows raised. Fighting here isn't prohibited, he thought. Ansel knew very well the Lord had the power to impose this. In Bright, there were once 2 people who exchanged hits, and they were automatically teleported out of the territory. HMN, territories seemed to have more differences than he thought. The gangsters' auras changed from smug to angry, and they gestured to attack them, not caring about the bystanders they hit on the way. However did the Lord here gather such a fanbase with these scum running about? Anyway, Ansel quickly cut some of the people who wanted to gang up on Luke, using skills Garen wholeheartedly taught him. In contrast, although Leo could handle one on his own, he struggled a lot. Basically, for the remaining half-dozen men, Ansel and Luke took care of them together. The past few days of traveling and fighting monsters together did wonders for their teamwork. They dealt with them quickly and efficiently, with Luke serving as an aggressive tank and Ansel as the main attacker. By the end, he, without using a weapon, also used his skill, shocking the men. Stab him, mana. A flash of light passed, and a huge piece of skin was taken away. What? Fuck, what did you do? The gangster said as he felt blood drop from his arms. What happened? He thought, disbelieving. The brat didn't have weapons on him, right? Ansel felt a few admiring gazes cast in their direction, but he received hateful glares from the men on the ground. Bastard. They took out their weapons, and naturally, the trio did as well. Luke took out his wooden spear and shield, while the other 2 took their swords. The gangsters did not care who they hit, and a lot of citizens became collateral damage. Luke was a real source of brute force, while Ansel received harsh training since he was a child, so they really managed to handle the men even when they were outnumbered. However, just as they were about to gain the upper hand, about a dozen men appeared, heroically taking down the gangsters. The actions were swift, especially since the gangsters were weakened, and this was followed by a soft but commanding voice emerging from the crowd. How many times have I told you that you can't hurt the citizens? Have you forgotten the prohibition to kill? Even if it was an accident, you will not be exempt. The low, stern voice echoed across the crowd, and the people's faces brightened instantaneously at the recognition of its owner. My lord, the people exclaimed, looking at him admiringly as if he saved their lives. Ansel looked on with interest. This timing was interesting. He bet 10 gold this guy had been watching for a while. Why, though? The owner of the voice was a very handsome young man. When everyone was dirty and haggard, he gave off a clean and charming feeling, at the same time exhibiting mature masculine charm. No wonder those women looked dreamy at the mention of him. He was even wearing well-made long sleeves with a turtleneck in this weather. Was he trying to pass himself up as a monk? More interestingly, Ansel also happened to know this guy from Terran. He had seen him campaign when he was on one of his dates. He remembered him because of the screaming girls and ladies, as if he was a pop star. Matthew White. Apparently, the Lord here was a small politician. One of his major taglines was that he was supposedly a clean politician from a commoner background. He heard before that people with 1,000 gold upon migration were required to even get a chance for a Lord token. How'd this guy get 1,000 gold in 24 hours? Very shady. Still, Ansel watched as the man was surrounded by his thankful citizens with narrowed eyes, and sneered. If he really wanted to help these people, he could have kicked those men. At least, he could have stopped the gangsters from harassing the people long term. He had seen Bright's plaster-face deal with troublesome people who entered his territory. The power of those with the Lord title, at least inside their jurisdictions, was not to be underestimated. Ansel narrowed his eyes as he looked at this man. It was either this Lord was too weak, or he didn't really want to help at all. Chapter 165, Wells. Ansel watched in interest as the gangsters were taken in for prison. Though looking at their still confident and menacing expressions, he reckoned this was counted as a childish timeout instead. Ansel's sights followed them as they were hauled out, and his eyes inevitably met with the lead gangsters, who was sending him a warning glare. In response, Ansel crossed his arms and smirked, sending him the middle finger, which made the latter explode and sprint to him. He easily did so too, and it was either he was super strong, or the ties were just for show. Ansel had a feeling it was the latter. "Looks like you don't want to escape from a beating, eh?" Ansel smirked, his hands raised and entering a ready-to-kick-butt posture. However, before Ansel could beat him to a half-dead state, the other of the Lord's guards surrounded the man and took him down, tying him up more snugly. After securing them all, the guards continued their way with the gangsters in tow, a lot of whom not forgetting to send glares in their direction, threatening, "See how I handle you later," he yelled, looking at them as if they were already dead meat he'd skewer in a barbecue later. Ansel and Leo looked at each other with raised eyebrows. They were so confident. Were they going to get released later after their timeout? However, neither of them pointed it out, knowing they were in another person's territory. When the crowd regained peace, Matthew, who had appeared unaffected all throughout, raised his hand and everyone became quiet. "I have actually come here because of a purpose. I have been going from community to community in order to personally congratulate everyone for protecting the territory well. Thank you." No, we wouldn't have been able to do it without you." "Yes, my lord, we never would have had the courage if it wasn't for you." "Well, the credit is to all of us," he said with a smile. "I have come with good news as well. When we upgraded, new buildings became available to us. A lot of which are useful new structures, such as the wells." He paused for effect, looking at the audience whose eyes were becoming brighter and brighter, full of hope. "That's right, the water source. We no longer have to make do with the restaurant gruel as our only source of water. We can now bathe again and drink our fills. Our territory will get better and better." Then he paused, eyes softening and looking a bit distraught. "Unfortunately, the building cost of each one is a bit costly, and there will be a small cost per use afterward. So now I request we work together for our home. Would you like to help me? Those who share will get higher limits than the others." He scratched the back of his head and looked down, as if embarrassed. "Each one costs about 100 gold each and a lot of resources. After repairing the wall, I do not have any left." "Yes, Lord, water. Everyone needs water." "I'm willing to share," one person said, manifesting a few pieces of silver. "Me too." "Don't be embarrassed, Lord, you've done so much already." "I will share 10 silver." "I will share 50. Matthew smiled brightly at them, looking grateful. "Thank you, everyone. I will not forget your contribution." Everyone cheered. They will finally have water. Luke nodded in admiration. "He looks like a pretty good guy." Both Ansel and Leo rolled their eyes. Ansel turned his head to Leo, asking with his eyes, "Did this guy get scammed a lot?" Leo nodded, "Yes, always. He almost joined a cult once," Leo whispered, making Ansel cackle a bit. Luke seemed to have felt the ridicule and turned his head to them, puzzled. "Huh, what?" "Nothing," the two shrugged and resumed watching the show. This speech of Matthew not only managed to solicit 100 gold and hundreds of resources, but this investment, and his constant use of inclusive language, would influence people to deeply feel for the territory, increasing loyalty. It was a bit smart if he really didn't have the money. But Ansel had a feeling the cost of that well was definitely lower than 100. And he did mention before that he had been going from community to community. He wondered how many wells he was able to fund using this method. Also, he could have also promised the people who shared that they could get the equivalent amount of water for free, instead of just buying a higher limit cap. His train of thought was interrupted when he saw Luke shake hands with Matthew. His hand slapped his forehead, and Leo shook his head. Then the idiot turned his head to them and called them over. "You guys, come here, come here." The two had no choice but to introduce themselves. "Ah yes, Ansel Witt," he said with a mysterious smile, "and Luke and Leonard Hugh. I've seen your performances, you are very strong." Ansel frowned at his knowing look. Although he hadn't confirmed it, he could feel the lords could invade his privacy somehow. Like they could read information about him he didn't want others to see. It was intrusive and he didn't like it at all. "Do know we especially welcome those who can contribute to the safety of the territory," Matthew said with a smile. "The conditions are very good, just say them and we will do what we can." For a moment, Ansel was tempted to ask him what it was, just out of curiosity. In the end, though, he shook his head. "We're trying to find people. We probably won't be staying for long." Matthew stared at them for a moment longer than proper, before sending them that winning smile. "Well, come to me if you change your mind," he said, and politely excused himself, heading back deeper into the territory. For a while they thought that was that. However, hours after parting, Ansel felt a weird feeling of stickiness in his back, making him frown for a long time. Their group was definitely being watched. Chapter 166, Charisma. Aberdeen City, a year ago. "Really?" he asked, confirming Hannah's answer. Hannah giggled. "In my eyes, no one can be more charming and handsome than you." He smiled. "Good answer." Hand in hand, the two of them moved forward with the crowd to watch the person on the platform. The man was already having his speech. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for gathering here today in this small open area in a park we all love. It is an honor and privilege to stand before you as a candidate for City Council. My journey has been a humble one, as you may know, but I believe this brings a unique perspective to the table. We have faced a fair share of challenges, but these obstacles have taught me the true value of resilience and persistence. I know the difficulties ordinary people face because I have lived them myself. In this journey, I carry with me not only my own experiences, but the collected dreams and aspirations of our class, of the workers having 2 shifts, of the fathers providing for their families, of the mothers just hoping to give better lives for the children, or the typical youngin just entering the world of adulthood. I promise unwavering commitment to listen and work tirelessly on your behalf. Together, we share a vision of a brighter future for our city, one where opportunities will not be limited by circumstances, and every voice is heard, as it was, fortunately, been with mine. I hope to share this voice with all of you. Let us all make our lives better. Thank you, and may we journey towards progress together." This was followed by raging cheers in the small crowd, as well as a lot of screaming from the young women. He looked around in interest, and then at the man with a gentle, smiling face, and he just knew it was a mask. Vismont Village, present. Leaving the slum areas, the trio went to the village center to rent a house, and also to find out more about the territory. The village center was a 1-story building located near the center of the territory. As with Bright, there were trade surfaces and information platforms placed equidistantly on the floor area. He saw the inquiry tabs and set another mission, after paying 50 damned silver, for information about a woman called Althea Witt. The reward ranged from 5 silver to 5 gold. Of course, the truth must be confirmed by the system first. When he was done with his errand, he saw the twins had already rented a house, which was tagged in the purchaser's, Leo's, map. One would be able to rent a room and share a common area with others, or rent the whole house for a price of 10 silver a day. To save money, they rented a room to share. There is basically only one housing type, a 2-story building. The smaller twins said as they traversed the lively streets lined with stall owners sitting on the ground and selling various things. They were mostly things they had from Terran, while a few managed to get monster parts from the beast tide and sold them for meat. They soon arrived at the assigned house and went in, immediately seeing that there were no furnishings. It was basically just a roof above their heads, but it was really better than most. Luke had even gone straight to the bathroom and came out refreshed and amazed. Fanboy Luke went to stand in front of them, telling them in glee, "The bathroom here is way better than our old one. The toilet here actually has a seat." Leo nodded. It was indeed better than the previous one. Ansel didn't bother, because Bright Territory also chose the same type of house. After resting for a bit, the trio went out to get something to eat. They lined up at the restaurant and endured another horrid meal, eating edible fruit they found to put down the horrid taste. They ate slowly so they could stay longer. Keeping their ears sharp, they tried to be subtle while catching as much gossip as they could. Restaurants were one of the places to gather intel. Even if they couldn't openly investigate the happenings in the territory, they could eavesdrop. It so happened that the table next to them was composed of old and new residents, with the former giving news to the latter. "So you can't kill here." It was amazing. One of the gang members killed someone before, and when the Lord found, not only did he kick this person out, but he worked hard to build a prohibition. Since then, no one dared to kill. "That's great. I have been wandering in the wild the past few days. I finally found a safe place." The old resident nodded proudly. "You don't know. Our Lord had to pay a lot of gold to set this prohibition. He really thinks of us everywhere." While many of the conversations were about their daily lives, if it rounded to the lord of the territory, it would be filled with amazement, gratitude, and awe. Even Ansel was amazed by the guy's charm. Anyway, eventually, the topic turned to rants about their sufferings, and the trio was no longer interested, leaving for the other facilities within the territory. Other than the restaurant, there was also the weapons shop and armory in the main commercial area. They went in to check out if there was any difference with the weapons, and realized it was all the same. They still bought a few of each because of the durability limitations of level E weapons. As they went out, they saw a commotion not too far away from them. Bored, the three of them decided to watch the show. Several meters away, they immediately found out what the ruckus was about. "They're building a well," came a yell within the crowd. "The people who shared will get priority. The Lord is fair. The Lord is building the well." More people followed the crowd, and Luke had long joined in. The other two simply looked at each other and sighed, finding a nearby tree to climb and get a better, but comfortable, view of all the commotion. They settled down on a tree each, and they looked at the center of the crowd. It was Matthew, of course, in front of an open space near the village center. There was a clear area of radius of about 5 meters surrounding him, and he seemed concentrating deeply on the task at hand. Sure enough, a showman was a showman. Soon the land in front of him shook. From there, it seemed like a force suddenly pushed down the soil and created a hole. Slowly, the people watched as the well materialized speck by speck, and then brick by brick. It was a magical sight that was never boring to watch. Ansel looked around to see the expressions of the people. It was a miraculous thing, and in the eyes of the people, so was Matthew himself. Chapter 167, Hypocrisy. Hypocrite. A whispered sneer sounded below them, catching Ansel's and Leo's attention. It was a dark-haired young man with huge eyebags, seemingly with a perennially somber expression. The two people beside him, a short-haired girl with golden hair and the short man with a semi-bald hairstyle, nodded in agreement. "I bet you 10 gold that a bucket of water would be insanely expensive," the girl said. "I bet you 10 gold he's going to ask for more money right after this," the shorter boy whispered. Both Ansel and Leo found this conversation far more interesting than the show in front. It was just that they didn't make those snide side remarks anymore until the well was built and celebrated. They didn't wait to see the results of the bet. Ansel and Leo watched as the 3 men and women walked away from the crowd, but didn't do anything more. While a bit curious about what they knew, it was none of their business after all. They would only care about all this drama if they suddenly decided to stay here for good, which they wouldn't. The next day, Ansel and the others went back to the village center to see if there were replies to their inquiries and news of their loved ones. To their surprise, though, a particularly large crowd was there, so they couldn't enter easily. As they waved through the crowd, they soon saw what the commotion was about. Matthew and his cronies were there, apparently making an announcement. "We are now a level 2 village and would need to increase our military. We are hiring guards, and we encourage strong men and youths to apply." Ansel knew lords could make announcements via the system. This guy was really patient to always want to appear in front of people every single time. Uninterested in the so-called announcement, Ansel and Leo continued on deeper into the village center, and each found a platform for their transactions. Unfortunately, none of their inquiries had been answered. After adjourning the gathering, Matthew approached their direction. He had seen their indifference and went to them with an amicable smile. "You seem to be very troubled. Can I do anything to help?" Luke nodded, looking pitiful. "Yes, Lord, we sent out inquiries about our loved ones. Unfortunately, there's no news." Matthew smiled. "Ah, yes, I saw that." Ansel approached the man and asked, "You have a list of citizens, don't you? Can you tell us if there's anyone with the name of Althea Witt, 25, and Cassie Hugh, 48, in your list?" Matthew frowned and did not answer immediately. He sent subtle glances at his surroundings, looking around the people who were surprised to know that he had a list. They looked at him, wondering what else he could see. Matthew stared at Ansel for a moment. When he only saw his genuine concern to find his loved ones, his guard loosened a little. "The system does indeed send me a list of names," he said, "along with their age and potential, like an automatic registration of sorts." The crowd nodded, thinking their lord really was powerful. Matthew seemed to be staring at a screen, but a few minutes later, he shook his head apologetically. I'm sorry, there was no one who matched their names at all. There was a Kathy Hugh, but she is only 12 years old. The three men's shoulders slumped a bit. Well, I assume my territory is located in a good place, as a lot of refugees from all directions find me. He offered, why don't you settle here and wait for their arrival? If you enter a fair employment contract with me, I can give you and your family's preferential treatment in buying property. I not only sell houses, but also land. Ansel had seen this advertisement in the tab. Matthew was selling property for a lot of gold. The down payment alone would cost most of his remaining gold. This guy was really bent on winning them over. However, Ansel still had some EQ and didn't reject this lord in front of his people. He decided to defer instead. Thank you for the offer, Lord Matthew. He said, we will discuss it. Matthew nodded in agreement and excused himself. Well, I'm looking forward to your good news, he said, sauntering back to the crowd of admiring citizens. We're really settling, Luke asked, a bit looking forward to finally finding a place to stay. Of course not, the other two answered him simultaneously. The big guy's shoulder slumped. No way I'm gonna spend more money here, Ansel said, and Luke blinked at him. Well, he is also very poor. Each building must be very expensive. It's a pity we can't use it. He apparently thought that Matthew's offer earlier was good. He's probably not as poor as he claims. Everyone who got a lord token should have at least 1,000 gold to be qualified. This caught the attention of the twins. What? They need 1,000 gold to own a territory. I owned 5 silver when I got here, Luke said, downcast. Leo looked at Ansel curiously. How'd you know? The lord of the previous territory had a very noisy follower. He said, shrugging, it's very likely the public knowledge of building costs is false as well. This made the twins think a bit, but only shook their heads. It was none of their business anyway. Besides, the lord had absolute rights in their territories. They could charge what they wanted. As such, the trio just continued to walk around the small village, gathering news along the way. They found that along with the cities they were familiar with, like Z City and Aberdeen, there were 3 other cities, some 100 kilometers away from each other. It could be said for certain that the migration definitely condensed their distances apart. This likely meant they could see people they knew soon. Or, Leo mused, everyone was distributed uniformly, and people from the same city could have been sent farther away. Their shoulders slumped at this, and their investigation became a bit more frantic. Ansel had also taken out Althea's photo when he saw some decent-looking people, newcomers in particular. Except for some compliments about their appearances, there was no one who had seen either Althea at all. Ansel sighed, frowning, but didn't lose hope. He felt it, he was getting closer and closer to Althea. And that they would meet very soon. As the trio left the building, a bit downcast, they found themselves walking around the few stone paths in the territory. Eventually, they passed by a relatively low-traffic alley. It wasn't an issue at first, but they started hearing some thumps and scratches, followed by aghast voices. Stop it, a female voice yelled, sobbing. Yow, we can indeed stop, just serve us, eh? Bastard! The 3 looked at each other with a frown, quickly following the noise to see 6 big men beating up 2 men, with a man holding on lewdly to the girl. It happened to be the dudes from the Tiger Gang. Out already? Ansel asked with a sneer, and already making chaos. Without further ado, the trio immediately darted into the alley, stopping the attack. They didn't even explain themselves and started beating the men up. What are you? Boy! Bang! Smack! Crack! Anyway, according to territory rules, as long as they didn't kill anyone, they'd be fine. A few minutes later, the men were lying down half dead, groaning in pain, and the twins went and picked up the woman's friends on the ground. Ansel went to the blonde lady and checked up on her, and then looked at her companions, who were also familiar. He realized it was the snarky trio from before. The girl blushed a bit at the handsome sight of her rescuer. Thank you, but her brown eyes passed by the gangsters on the ground. Their rescuers had made sure the gangster couldn't get up and wake up for a while, but they would wake up eventually, wouldn't they? What would happen then? Thank you, the shorter one said as he was assisted to stand by Leo. Can we trouble you to carry us home? He mumbled, volume lowering in shame. It's just in the next block. The trio looked at each other and shrugged. Since they began to help, might as well go all the way. They arrived at the house a few minutes later, and they encountered a lot of neighbors who definitely saw the poor state of the teenagers. However, many of those people scoffed at them rather than show some concern, while the others just ignored them altogether. Ansel's pretty eyebrows rose. The trio's reputation definitely wasn't very good. The shorter man smiled wryly, the pale man remained indifferent, while the girl bit her lips in bitterness. They entered the house in silence, and the three could only drag themselves to give the few bits of fruit they managed to collect. "You really don't need to bother," Leo said for the third time since they entered. "We simply had the ability to help, so we did." "No, you've done so much," the pale and somber young man said, motioning to the girl and then to the other lad. "My name is Crow, this is Sunny, and that guy lying over there is Dog. We are sorry we got you involved. Those groups will definitely trouble you next." They all looked guilty, but they couldn't give them anything in return except for their heartfelt thanks. Leo, however, noticed their wording. "You were targeted." After a sigh, they nodded. "They said that they heard us badmouth the Lord," Dog sneered. "How dare us? You saw how those people looked at us." Sunny scoffed bitterly. "HMPH. Do we look stupid to badmouth that guy in front of his fans?" "We never did, at least not in public, but everyone I knew that didn't like the Lord was targeted by those gangs, without exception." Ansel raised an eyebrow. Lords probably had a way to see the loyalties of the people. At least it could show their affection level. Hey, then his score must be very low. Before he could dwell on this thought, though, he was addressed by one of the three. "I know you. That Masu really wanted to win you over. You must be strong." The pale man looked at the three of them, realizing who they were. They were quite famous, beating up the gangsters and receiving the Lord's favor and all. Fanboy Luke sensed the sarcasm and was a bit puzzled. "You make it sound like a bad thing. Relatively strong people, not under the Lord, well, they tend to be the vanguard during attacks. Some even mysteriously disappear. You know that circulating story where this Lord spent money and effort to implement a no-kill zone in the territory? Well, my aunt was a victim, one of many, and he did more than just murder." Crow sneered. "The Lord didn't even punish him, he just kicked him out. Who knows if he's wreaking havoc somewhere else?" The trio looked at each other in silence. They could imagine what that guy had done based on Crow's tone. They felt heavy because in time more and more such situations were bound to happen if things remained as it was. Case in point, didn't they just rescue these three from a similar situation? It was here that they heard the door open abruptly, a deep voice immediately bellowing, "Are you guys all right?" Dog scratched his poor ears. "Cousin, we're fine thanks to these guys." Thanks, but he saw just how badly the young men and women were beaten, and a fire of anger exploded. Dog managed to drag his pained body to stop him. "Calm down if you don't want to run to your fourth territory." The man closed his eyes and calmed down. It took him quite some time, and he tilted his head upwards and faced the ceiling while huffing heavily. Ansel was reminded of chimneys blowing smoke. After he sufficiently calmed down, the newcomer turned to face them with a smile. "Hello, my name is Bull, 25. I'm sort of the guardian of these kids." He did a light bow to express his thanks. Ansel and the others were a little ashamed. It wasn't much. Not if you know how much trouble helping them could bring you. Bull sighed and looked at them, figuring out a way to express his gratitude. As he stared at them, his very good head immediately placed them in a memory. He happened to be in the village center not too long ago. "You were looking for someone, aren't you? I've been to 3 territories since the migration and I boast very good facial memory." This was also why he did well as a guard in the royal territory. Ansel and the twins looked at each other and nodded, trying out their luck. Ansel took the photo from his space and handed it over. The twins didn't have photos of their mother and could only eagerly wait for Ansel's good news. Bull's thick eyebrows rose all the way to his forehead the moment he saw the photo. "It's that beautiful pregnant woman." "Yeah. What?" Ansel flinched, basically teleporting in front of Bull, scaring the soul out of the poor guy. "Where have you seen her?" he asked, grabbing the larger man's shoulders, and it took a few moments before the latter could utter a word. Bull paused and tried to make a mental map. It wasn't difficult because the system kept maps of everything they passed through. "I'll send you my map," he said. After all, they couldn't show their own screens to others, so it wasn't conventionally straightforward to see each other's maps. HMN. In his travels, Bull found a special function of the system maps. That was, they could transfer maps to others, for a price of course. Anyway, he gladly took over the cost and sent it to Ansel. It was there. He gave him a verbal description of the area where they met, the former location of royal territory. I remember she went eastward and managed to avoid the beast tide. He couldn't help but look at this handsome man, that woman's brother. Even if their intersection was short, she was very beautiful and had a special aura about her. He was understandably curious about this relative of hers. He patted the man's shoulder with an interested expression. You don't know, when she was kicked out, the woman wasn't lost, like she had a direction. That's all I know. Ansel stared at the transferred map with bright eyes, and they could swear there were little tears lining up. They stayed silent, waiting for Ansel to gather himself. The man sniffed and sneaked a little wipe under the eye, before resuming his cool image. Thanks, he said, I'll go there immediately, he said and looked at the twins. They nodded even without him asking. Of course, we'll come with you. I also want to see the goddess again. Bull looked at the three as they stood up with a complex expression. Before the trio could utter their farewells, Bull cut them off. We'll go with you as well. Everyone turned to look at him. What? We can't stay here anymore, Bull said, rudely pointing at the three teenagers. These kids would lose their lives eventually. The three looked aghast and offended, flushed in shame, but they couldn't say anything against it. After all, there was a very real chance that it would happen. And so, Ansel's team grew even more. Chapter 169, Pharmacy Skills. Aberdeen City, a few years prior. Inside the custom laboratory inside their own home, a certain plant enthusiast had submerged herself in her creations. Alicia sighed and just placed the food on a clean surface, which was much smaller than before heading outside. After all these years, they knew it was counterproductive to distract her when she was in her own zone. If there wasn't an explosion, then the experiment could fail altogether, and she definitely wouldn't eat until she recreated the destroyed progress. All they could hope was that her stomach rumbled enough to distract her, and she smelled the food on the tray. Looking back at her nominal daughter, she reluctantly left the room, trying not to make too much noise. Hours later, Althea finally emerged from the zone and lifted a small beaker with pinkish liquid. It was her special moisturizer, designed to greatly improve the smoothness of skin, regardless of skin type. I did it, this will definitely be a gold mine, Tilda, she said, a little smug. Next up would be other beauty products. Then, when she gained more knowledge, she would start creating medicinal solutions as well. Hopefully, these medicines would help out her husband and help keep him safe. Anyway, with more resources and money, she could travel more and procure more and rarer materials. She couldn't depend on her husband, parents, and Winona all the time, right? She stretched, satisfied with today's achievements, but as she did so, her stomach rumbled. Hungry, she mumbled, and she turned her head, her emerald eyes ending on the tray with a smile. Food after success was just so much more delicious. 15 days of protection period. Altera Village, present. Inside her laboratory filled with powder and different parts of plants, a certain auburn-haired woman stared at an invisible screen with bright eyes. Some of these had actually appeared before, but she didn't have much time to appreciate them much because she was in the zone. She definitely did apply them as soon as she could, though. Congratulations on upgrading to pharmacist, D. Congratulations for creating alien crop fertilizer, B. Alien crop fertilizer, B+. Special fertilizer that could increase the growth rate of alien crop by 5 times and increase the survival rate by 100%. Detected contribution to world knowledge, receive B gift pack. Learned growth skill mixture calculator, LV1, determine the mixture of basic liquids, level ED, with 100% accuracy. Consumption, 10 mana. After spending the past few days inside her lab, she finally got it, and the rewards were satisfying. It was worth noting that skills she received after becoming a pharmacist seemed to be growth-type skills. From the NPCs, growth-type skills improved the more it was practiced effectively. She liked this setup very much. She then looked at the skill she also received a day ago. Growth Skill Advance Identification, LV1, Assess basic combinations, level ED, descriptions and functions. Consumption, 10 mana. The description might seem basic, but this skill alone had been immensely helpful the past couple of days. Her progress could be said to have doubled because of it. Anyway, she looked at her products with bright eyes. Not only did she improve the fertilizer for local crops, but she also managed to mix one for terranean plants. She could see it, self-sufficiency for all kinds of crops would finally come. They would be able to taste the old food again. The ingredients here were not bad and they were abundant, but the variety was poor and the flavor of the terran crops was still superior. Of course, it could also be because they had only occupied a small place in this world. There were probably more ingredients out there waiting to be explored. This was also something to look forward to in the future. She heard pharmacists could get major discounts in medicine stores in cities and towns. That alone was major news that made her very happy. Another perk of being a pharmacist was that this skill could increase the effect of whatever she made, even using the same prescription as others. It was either increased production or increased effect, hence the plus signs. Anyway, now that she had the formula, she could produce it in the new factory. Although the effect of non-pharmacists was less than half of hers, it was still extremely valuable and would be a great source of funds. She stretched her arms out to squeeze away the tiredness and saw back, before she remembered the gift pack she had just received. Before going out of her laboratory, she opened her new gift pack. A small circle appeared floating above her hand, soon revealing the content of the gift. It was a pretty pair of brown boots. They looked too big, but she put it on and they conveniently adjusted to her size. After walking around the lab to check on its comfort, she took a look at its stats. Eagle Boots C, plus 35 agility, plus 10% weight reduction. Very good. This would allow her to explore the mountains near her territory more efficiently. After all, she really neglected this aspect of her profession. Now that she had already given birth, the time for her exploration would come soon. Not to mention, the practicality would allow her to go home earlier, giving her time with her Barbies. Equipment. Head, none. Ears, none. Body, leather jacket, cotton undergarments plus 2 defense. Synthetic vest plus 3 defense. Rainbow silk undergarments, A, plus 80 defense plus 10 agility plus 50 spirit. Arms, arm brace plus 1 defense. Legs, leather pants plus 2 defense. Hands, Bellagio bow B, plus 40 ATK. Leather gloves plus 1 defense. Feet, eagle boots C, plus 35 agility, plus 10% weight reduction. She looked at her equipment list with satisfaction, finally going out of the room for things other than food and a short nap. She stopped at a table and saw a lot of food prepared. With a smile, she washed her hands and extended them to get a bite. She ate very quickly though. After all, she had not played with her Barbies for days. Chapter 170, Color. When she went out of her lab, she headed straight to the living room where she knew the team would be hanging out in, if they were there. Her eyes zoned immediately on the 2 Barbies on the cot, and her world exploded with color. HMMHGGGH, her Barbies brightened up and extended their little chubby hands at the sight of her. Her heart warmed and she took them from the cushion and into her arms. I really neglected you, she sighed with a bit of regret, before placing wet smooches on their smooth faces. They giggled and everyone in the room smiled. Well, they will understand. You did it so they don't miss out on the wonderful tastes we grew up with, Sheila said. The next generation would surely love you for it. Althea chuckled at this. Shall I put my name in the history books then? Sheila laughed. Of course, it would definitely be easier to teach kids since they'd love sweets. Speaking of the next generation, the children Maya, Theo, and now Horace were watching the adults with interest as they played building blocks, creating quite the tall structure. The adults soon started to discuss grown-up stuff, boring the kids, and they ran outside and went back to the playground. The playgrounds, consisting of slides, swings, monkey bars, etc., were gifted by Baron's team. They were placed in the gardens by the flowers, and the children loved them. Even Horace, who tried to maintain a serious I'm an adult face, tried the slide many times. Of course, all with an unchanging face, even on his way down the slide. It was cute in its own way. Anyway, the success of the playground prompted Althea to order a few larger sets, to be placed on several parks around the territory. There weren't many children now, but she would like to think there would be in the future. She believed that the territory would eventually be filled with the laughter of children, adding another dab of color to the territory. While the energetic kids went out, her Barbies, on the other hand, were laid on the soft blanket on the floor. As soon as they landed, they immediately tried rolling. Althea giggled and helped them out, and she wondered who would be able to roll on their own first. "So, what did you dish up this time, boss?" Harold asked, and Althea lifted her head to him at the question. Althea smiled proudly. "We will be able to increase production of terranian plants to the degree of the refresh rate here," she said. "Things would only get better." Harold was very happy. Although the seasonings they made using local ingredients were good, how could it defeat the formulations that had undergone thousands of years of the perfection process? "I rented another factory to create fertilizers this time. I'm planning on mixing it with compost to see the effect." This meant they couldn't handle this in the same factory as the existing herbal mixture factory. Sheila nodded, immediately knowing what to do. "I will also send hiring notices." A lot more people would be very happy about the new openings. Although there were plenty of people going outside, there were even more who could be used more within the walls, especially those who simply couldn't handle the monsters without eventually losing a limb. Of course, they'd have to be upfront about the product being handled. Add 20% to their wage, compared to employees of the same level, Althea said after a thought. Sheila agreed. "Got it." Althea smiled, happy that she had such reliable teammates. Because of this, she could now focus on her kids, who in their own way were vying for her attention. For instance, Little Meatball drooled all over himself trying to call her, while Little Pepper's little arms were extended in her direction, cute tiny hands opening and closing repeatedly. As she laughed and hugged the kids, feeling their warmth and softness, they stayed just like that for a while. With the Barbies in her arms, she took a look at her territory stats. Territory stats. Status Level 2 Village. Area 3,142,000 square meters. Residents 965, 121 permanent, 844 temporary. Total population 1524. Base resources. Wood 9201,0000. Stone 6108,000. Money 14,282 gold, 109,963 silver, 389,497 copper. Reputation 70. Buildings: Village Center LV2, Weaponry Shop LV1, Defensive Wall LV3, Warehouse LV2, Farm LV1, Training Hall LV1, Bath House LV1. Bonus Building, Custom Building. Building slots 7+1. The territory now had close to 1,000 people, over half of which were citizens. It shouldn't take long for the next upgrade. Anyway, whether she wanted to upgrade or not, she'd have no choice but to face it anyway. Well, at least she'd open up new buildings. Judging from the options upon leveling up, they should be pretty good. She didn't think that she'd be inferior to level 2 villages, even if she had just upgraded. Based on what the NPCs told her, she was doing very, very well, considering they've only been in existence for less than a month. They didn't think it was possible, actually. In fact, rather than fear of hostile villages, she was more looking forward to encountering other territories now, as long as they were friendly, because the market would be wider, and they could add an even higher profit margin. If done well, it would only improve their already thriving economy. An improved economy meant a better life, and more resources for the creation of superior defense systems. And because the defense system was so good, it would give way to the improvement of everything else inside its scope, not just the economy and lifestyle. Even when they were currently closed off to the world, the economy of the territory was already very healthy. A good part was due to her and Baron, who hired a good bulk of the population, increasing overall spending power. It was just that the money from other territories must be much bigger. Not to mention, most of the plant seeds she bought didn't exist here, at least not in the area. She was looking forward to seeing more varieties in the future. Althea placed the children back in the stroller, ready to take them out for an afternoon walk. After a moment of consideration, she decided to head to the factory area to check on their progress. "Aren't you tired, boss?" he asked, After all, she had been stuck in her lab for a day. "No, I'm plenty energized right now," she said with a smile. "I'll just rest earlier when I feel tired." "Oh," Harold said and looked conflicted. He decided to just join her in the end and show her the status of the factories under him by the way. As they walked, the two chatted about the innovations and revivals that would follow. "You seem to already have ideas on what to add to our sauce and condiment selection." Harold smiled. His old face had already visibly looked younger, very happy and content. "I feel proud when I see all the stalls and stores using our products, and I feel proud of seeing the happy faces brought by our flavor," he said. "I feel young again, and with such a heavy purpose in life." Althea looked at the grandpa figure in amusement, but her eyes also brightened at the prospects that they would be bringing the territory. It was said that food was the symphony of flavor that united a society, while spices were the notes that harmonized a culture. With a wider variety of raw materials, the wider the creations the people could create, and the more colorful the people's lives could be. She was going to give a safe haven to the people, and she also wanted to give them a platform to show off what they could do. The territory would only get better and better, never stagnant. Just as it should be.